I got is the man in the mirror. Only God, he's the one with my tears. Sitting on this train, but home is what I fear. Pain, is it clear? Will I make it this year? I have been looking at myself. I am really so proud, and I'm praying for my friends now. Looking up at the clouds. I really wish you could see me now.
Okay, so I just finished making a video of me mixing this entire full song. And essentially what I did was I went over how I put all the melodies together. I've got the bass in one place, all the drums together, and then all the vocals together, and how I, mix them and sidechain things and this, that, and the other. In this video, I want to go over how I mastered this song. So once I've mixed it, I've got all the levels where I want them to be. I've got things sidechained. I've got things in mono versus separated, blah, blah, blah. Once I've done all that, I put everything on the master chain, or on the master channel, and then I put on my master chain. And it's almost exactly the same as my master chain when I'm mastering, or I'm going to put that in quotes, mastering a beat. The only difference is you'll notice I have a soft clipper first, and that's because when I'm mixing the full song, I like things to be nice and loud, and so that soft clipper is just to make sure we start at 0, and I'm, soft clipping off any signal. I am open to, changing that if somebody has a suggestion for something that might function better. Alternatively, you can just run all of this into this compressor, and it'll kind of do a similar thing. But I like the texture and like the sound that the soft clipper gives versus the compressor. So again, I'm open to ideas, but I'm using that to make sure that I start pretty close to 0. I may be going above or below a little bit, but it's pretty close to 0. And this is just the stock Fruity soft clipper that's in FL Studio. So the next thing in the chain after that is a compressor, and all I'm doing at first is low cutting just a little bit. So after the soft clipper, I have the compressor, and these are the settings that I currently have on it. I am open to changing some of the settings on the attack and release. This is what I've found so far that's given me pretty good results. So let's turn everything off and turn things on as we talk about them. So without the soft clipper, we can see how loud we're gonna get, and let's just loop it because this is how I mastered it anyway. So as you can see, before I put the soft clipper on, I'm going above 0, and I think the low cutting is also adding to the volume a little bit. Depending on the track, it may not add a whole lot of extra volume, but in this case it's adding just a little bit of volume. Okay, then I put on the soft clipper to kind of control that and bring everything down to 0.
Don't let me grow in, what if I drown? I don't want to be another grave in the ground. Days turn to nights and nights turn to day. Honestly, this is so much more than pain. Is it more than...
Okay, then I turn on the compressor, and the compressor is a compressor. I've got the threshold being brought down by about 10, pushing the gain up just a couple of decibels, and the ratios is about 3 to 1. So what this is doing is just compressing the entire thing down and then bringing up the volume of the whole track just a little bit.
Don't let me grow in, what if I drown? I don't want to be much more than pain. Is it more than the heat?
Okay, then I have a limiter. This limiter is just there to observe things, really. Okay, the next thing in the chain is a patch or preset, which is messing with the stereo. So I'm taking the lows, putting them in mono, taking the highs, separating them, and I'm only doing that a little bit. You could pull this all the way down and be a little bit more extreme with it, but I like to do it subtly. And the reason I do it more subtly is because when I'm mixing the beat itself, I'm doing this a lot as well. So I don't need to mess with the stereo too much. You'll notice when I turn that on, the volume does jump up a little bit. I'm not entirely sure why. If someone has an explanation for why, I'm sure it has to do with how it is actually functioning. I'm sure I'm pushing volume up somewhere in here, and I'm just not. I don't know exactly where. It's probably in one of the multi-band compressors. Anyway, if anyone knows exactly where it is that this is pushing up the volume, please let me know so that I can adjust it. But it's not really going to matter that much because the next thing in the chain is Maximus. And on Maximus, I'm going to be doing some limiting, or you could do compression, but in this case, I'm doing limiting. And that's going to take care of that little bit of extra volume that jumped up. So in Maximus, what I did was I started with my mid band, I soloed it, and then I moved the bands in until I didn't really hear the hi-hats anymore. And then I moved this one in until I didn't hear the kick or the 808 quite as much. Okay, and once I did that, I just started the process of compression and or limiting. So I started with my lows.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown?
I pushed the lows up by 0.4 decibels and I pulled it back by 0.4. So I'm limiting just a tiny amount, not a whole lot. Then I went to my mids. On the mids, I pushed up by 0.3, pulled it down by 0.3, and I also brought the ceiling down a little bit. So as you can see, I'm doing some compression every now and again, but not a lot. So there's a little bit of compression happening there, a little bit more happening there, and there. So I'm compressing every now and again, but not every single time something hits that's, you know, louder. And then something else I'm doing is I'm using the expansion tool to bring up the main clap sound a little bit in this range.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown?
And also some of the snares.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown? I don't want to be another grave in the ground. Days turn to nights and nights turn to day.
Okay, on the high band,
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown?
I'm doing essentially the same thing. I'm just compressing some of the stuff that gets really, really loud. So I think this was a snare here.
Don't let me grow in. What?
Yeah, I think that's a
Don't let me
snare.
grow in. What if I drown? I don't want to be another grave in the ground.
So I'm compressing the loudest stuff here and mostly leaving everything else alone.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown? I don't want to be another grave in the
And then
ground.
at this stage, something else I'm doing is adding a little bit of saturation. I flipped through the two different saturation types that are here, and then I just kind of picked the one that I liked the texture of more, and then I chose that one. And then I brought the ceiling down so that I'm only really affecting the stuff that's the very, very loudest. So it's not adding saturation to everything, but just the loud stuff. Okay, and then on the master, I'm doing more compression, and I'm also using some expansion. So I put a node not all the way up to where the limiting is happening, but just like one step down, essentially. And then what I've done is I've boosted everything in this region by 2.45% in this case. I usually go for about 2, and then I'll push it up to like 2.5 if I'm not quite loud enough when I'm mastering. In this case, 2.45. And what that does is anything that's below the screen line is going to get a little bit louder.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown? I don't want to be another grave in the ground. Days turn to nights and nights turn to day. Honestly, this is so more.
So it's just bringing up the volume of the quieter stuff. Something I didn't mention is with my lows, mids, and highs, I'm also messing with the stereo a little bit. So on the lows, you'll notice I'm putting it in mono, merging it by 10%, not messing with the mids. And then on the highs, I'm separating by 10%. And when I'm mixing and mastering the beat itself, like on its own, I'm doing this even more so, which is why I'm only doing it a little bit here. If I got stems from somebody and they didn't mess with the stereo as much as I did, I would probably do more here. But again, I've already done this quite a bit, so I don't need to do it too much more.
Don't let me grow in. What if I drown? I don't want to be another.
After Maximus, we have a soft clipper, a limiter, and a loudness meter. So what I do is I keep the soft clipper off for now, turn on the limiter, and then I look at the limiter and I kind of see like how much volume I think I can push into the soft clipper before the sound gets destroyed. And I've already done this, which is why you see the volume getting limited down, because I've already pushed the volume. We can go back to Maximus and see how much I ended up pushing it up. So I ended up pushing the volume by 0.9 decibels. So I pushed the volume 0.9 decibels up. Then it gets put into the soft clipper, it gets soft clipped off, and then it comes down to the limiter. And we see it here. Okay, and then after that I turn on my loudness meter and I use this to kind of tell me how loud the track is overall. So at this point, once I've gotten to my loudness meter, I will highlight the entire beat, and then I'll let the beat play from a little bit before the beginning, and then I will let basically the entire beat play. And I will look at a couple of things. So I'm looking at the integrated LUFS here. I'm looking at the short-term LUFS. And then I'm also looking at the true peak max. So with the short term, I'm just kind of, looking at that, glancing at that, seeing how loud things are in the moment. But really what I'm looking at is this integrated LUFS. I kind of shoot for around -9, plus or minus point, 2, 4, 5, something like that is okay, depending on, it depends on the beat in the song really, but I'm shooting for around -9. And then for the true peak max, I want to make sure that this never gets up to 0 or above 0, and if it does, I go back and I turn things down. So I normally just hit play, let the beat play, and then, like I said, I look at these settings.
much more than
Okay,
pain.
and at this stage, as I'm listening for the, listening to the beat and watching the numbers and making sure my loudness is where I want it to be, I'm also adjusting things. So one thing I adjusted quite a bit in this particular song was the 808. I had the 808 bass like way too loud to begin with. So when I got to this stage, it was just overpowering everything. So I had to turn it down a little bit. But that also turned down the loudness of the whole track. So I had to go back and adjust things a little bit more. So like I'm adjusting things as I go. It's not just like set and forget, So it's I'm always listening for things and making sure things sound the way I want them to sound. Because as you add compression and as you add limiting and other things like that, you're going to change the perceived loudness of every single sound that you're doing that to. So you really want to be listening for things as you go. And if you're adding something and it doesn't make the sound better, you probably don't need to add it. You know what I mean? And that's funny, probably coming from me, because I tend to add a lot of like redundant plugins here and there. But if you have any questions about any part of the process, feel free to throw them down in the comments. Also, if you have suggestions for anything you want to see in the future, feel free to throw that down in the comments as well. Also, in the last video, I talked about the de-esser situation that I had. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, go watch the video on mixing this song. But if you have suggestions for like free plugins that do some of the things that I'm doing in an easier way, I would love to know down below. And I'm sure anyone else that's watching that is trying to learn with me would also like to know. So for example, if you know like a really good de-esser plugin that's free that you can use that works relatively well, I'm sure other people as well as myself would like to know about that. If you know of any other good plugins that are good for mixing and mastering, throw those down in the comments as well. What I'm trying to say is throw everything down in the comments. Just type things in the comments. Please don't type random stuff. But anyway, let's listen back to the song and let's let it ride.
Only got a car, it's the Pull them bitch together when I'm This is new me,
Only one I got is the man in the mirror. Only got God, he's the one that I fear. Sitting on his train, but home isn't near. Pain isn't clear, will I make it this year? Can't even see myself, cause the glass isn't clear. My reflection isn't even here. I am nowhere to be found. Me that I hide is safe and sound. Hey yo, Red, should we let him out? What if I never come back around? But I got this music in my head so loud. People really hear me, but what if they clown? What if they don't let me grow, and what if I drown? I don't wanna be another grave in the ground. Days turn to nights and nights turn to day. Honestly, this is so much more than pain. Is it more than hate?